All right, let's just jump right into this explainer by talking about a completely universal and honestly incredibly frustrating experience. You definitely know the one. It's that moment when our absolute best attempts at self-improvement, setting big goals or finally breaking those bad habits, just completely fall apart. We make this rock-solid plan, we literally have all the motivation in the world, and then nothing. Nothing changes. Or actually worse, we slide right back into our old ways. We buy the expensive gym membership, but we literally never go. We vow to stop procrastinating and then somehow find ourselves deep in some random Wikipedia rabbit hole at 2 a.m. So what's going on here?
Why do our commitments fail? Well, it's a question that really haunts anyone who's trying to live a better life, build better habits, or honestly, just get out of their own way. And it all starts with this core problem. We all kind of suffer from this profound illusion that our logical, rational mind is actually the one steering the ship. We think that just because we consciously decided to do something, our brain is just going to automatically obey. We're totally mistaking our intentions for our reality. But the truth about human behavior is far more complex, and frankly, a whole lot more primal than that. To really understand what's actually happening behind the scenes, we need to look at this absolutely brilliant metaphor from author Thomas Aletheia. He puts it like this: your conscious mind rides on the shoulders of an 800-pound gorilla, your unconscious. I mean, it's such a vivid picture, right? Because it perfectly captures the dynamic we're dealing with. You can make as many logical commitments as you want, you can sit up there and shout directions from the top of its shoulders literally all day long, but absolutely nothing changes until that 800-pound gorilla actually decides it's going to move.
And this just brilliantly illustrates the total mismatch in power here. On the one hand, you've got the conscious rider. This is your logical mind, the part making the long-term plans, reading the self-help books, setting the alarms for 5 a.m. It's smart, sure, but it's fragile, and it tires out incredibly easily. Then on the other hand, you have the unconscious gorilla. This is the primal, super powerful, habit-driven part of your mind that actually drives your everyday actions. So think about it. When the rider says, hey, let's go left to the gym, but the gorilla wants to go right to the couch, guess who wins? The gorilla. The gorilla goes exactly wherever it wants to go.
Now, what's really fascinating is the biology behind why our unconscious actually operates this way. It's absolutely crucial to realize that the gorilla isn't the enemy here. It's really not trying to ruin your life. Actually, it's highly evolved to keep you alive, and it totally thinks it's helping you out. First off, it relies super heavily on habits because they're incredibly energy efficient and lightning fast. I mean, it takes zero conscious effort to just react automatically. Secondly, repeating behaviors form these really stubborn, thick neural pathways in your brain. If habits were actually easy to change, you'd be totally paralyzed just trying to think through every single tiny decision all day long, from tying your shoes to driving your car. And finally, the gorilla is driven by genuinely good intentions. It repeats past behaviors simply to protect you from perceived threats and to avoid emotional pain, even if those exact behaviors, like stress eating or procrastinating, are actually completely destructive to your modern-day goals.
To put into perspective just how powerful this gorilla really is, the author shares this shocking clinical test result from his own life. Back during his early counseling days, he took a highly calibrated psychological test that measures self-deception. Now, he figured he was a pretty self-aware guy. But the result? 85%. Literally, 85%. He was deceiving himself completely unaware of his own true motivations 85% of the time. That means the vast, vast majority of his decisions were being made entirely by the unconscious mind without him even realizing it. So this just brilliantly shows the massive gap between our conscious awareness and what that unconscious gorilla is actually doing behind the scenes while we foolishly think we're the ones in charge.
All right, so that brings us to part one, your invisible worldview.
So, if this giant gorilla is the one doing the driving, what map is it actually reading? Well, this brings us to your worldview. Think of your worldview as this invisible framework of unconscious beliefs that you just absorbed from childhood. It filters your reality and totally distorts your true needs. These are all those implicit, unspoken rules you learned super early on about things like success, love, safety, and self-worth. You soak them up from your parents, your culture, your early experiences. And, often these inherited rules are completely contradictory, but they still act as this incredibly rigid map. And your unconscious strictly follows this map, filtering every single thought and coloring every single emotion, even when following that old, outdated map is literally leading you straight into trouble.
Let's actually walk through this really great micro-story from the text to see exactly how this plays out in real life. We'll call it the snooze button root cause chain. So why are you late? Well, because you hit snooze. Why did you hit snooze? Because you're tired. Why are you tired? Because you stayed up super late, mindlessly scrolling on your phone like a zombie. But why were you scrolling? because you didn't want to go to sleep and actually have to face the reality of tomorrow. Maybe tomorrow brings a meeting you're absolutely dreading, or just a general sense of failure you're trying really hard to ignore. So the really crucial point here is that even the simplest, most mundane act of self-sabotage, like just smacking that snooze button, is almost rarely just about being physically tired. It's actually being driven by much deeper, hidden fears that are all perfectly mapped out in your worldview.
Moving right along, let's dive into part 2, the hidden shadow self.
Let's see how this all builds into an even deeper layer of the unconscious mind. And this is a layer that actively fights against our conscious goals. It's known as the shadow self. Basically, this contains all the unconscious parts of your personality, things like fear, anger, jealousy, and pain. The parts that you deny, reject, or just shove down because you or society have decided they are unacceptable. From a really young age, we're basically taught to hide these parts of ourselves. But here's the thing. When we try desperately to be perfect or to always be good, we don't actually get rid of our negative traits. Nope, we just force them into the dark. And down there in the dark, without the light of our conscious awareness to keep them in check, they actually grow stronger, more autonomous, and way more destructive. And because we completely refuse to see these negative traits in ourselves, we end up doing something called projection. This is basically when you see your own hidden flaws in someone else. Think about it for a second. If you ever feel this intense, completely irrational anger at someone else's arrogance, or if you get deeply triggered by a coworker's rudeness, it's very often just a reflection of your own denied traits. You are literally projecting your shadow onto them like they're a movie screen. Your shadow self reacts so strongly to the very qualities in others that you simply cannot accept in yourself. And honestly, recognizing that you're projecting is one of the hardest but absolutely most vital steps to gaining real self-awareness.
Which naturally leads us to part 3, retraining your unconscious mind.
Okay, so let's recap. We have a giant, incredibly stubborn gorilla reading a totally distorted map, actively avoiding a hidden shadow self. Seriously, how on earth do we fix this? Well, first, we have to reclaim the shadow. And the explainer source gives us this fantastic actionable technique called the 3-2-1 shadow process. Let's really break this down so you can actually start using it. Step 3 is to describe it in the third person. So focus on a trait that deeply bothers you in someone else and just say, "It is rude." You're just observing it objectively from the outside. Step 2 is to talk to it in the second person. You literally imagine having a conversation with that trait, asking, "Why are you rude? What are you trying to protect me from?" You're treating it almost like a separate entity. And finally, step 1 is to own it in the first person. This is where you shift and say, "I am rude. I have the capacity for rudeness." Just acknowledging that you actually hold the capacity for that specific trait strips away its hidden power. It brings it right out of the dark shadow and into the light.
Next up, we really need to disrupt the gorilla's automatic routines so we aren't just blindly reacting to things all day long. Try introducing this surprisingly simple question to yourself. What is my next thought? And then just wait. Just notice what happens. Usually, your mind goes completely quiet for a second. You sit there waiting for a thought to arrive, and there's just a blank space. It's wild. This is actually a super powerful trigger to spark raw awareness. It shows you how to physically notice the silent gap between your thoughts, proving to you experientially that you are not your thoughts. You are simply the awareness experiencing them. And this brief pause, this tiny little gap, is exactly where your true power lies.
Now, when it comes to actually changing your behavior, whatever you do, do not fight the gorilla. You will absolutely lose every time. Steering it requires you to make ridiculously small changes. I mean, ridiculously small. Now, your conscious mind might think these tiny changes are completely useless because they don't feel very grand or sweeping, but they are actually your secret weapon, because they slip right past the unconscious mind's resistance alarm. They don't trigger that massive panic or fear of the unknown that big, sweeping life changes always do. Over time, these tiny, consistent actions gently carve out brand new, positive neural pathways in your brain. It's really like a trickling stream of water slowly carving out a new riverbed. And of course, throughout this entire process of redirecting your life, you have to practice deep self-compassion, always remembering that your mind, as misguided as it might be, is really just trying its best to protect you.
To sort of summarize this entire dynamic, the text relies on a really powerful concept attributed to the famous psychologist Carl Jung. And it goes like this: what you resist persists. It's so true. Fighting your unconscious, actively hating your bad habits, and being constantly angry at your shadow self, that only feeds them more emotional energy. It literally just makes them stronger. True, lasting change doesn't come from some brutal, exhausting battle of willpower. It actually comes from raw awareness, radical acceptance, and the gentle integration of all your parts, both the rider and the gorilla.
So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with one final and hopefully slightly provocative question to really reflect on today. Where is your 800-pound gorilla taking you right now? Seriously, if you just let the habitual, hidden parts of your mind continue to drive for the next 5 years, where exactly will you end up? Are your everyday actions being driven by conscious, deliberate choices? Or are they being driven by invisible fears, old childhood maps, and ancient habits? Take a moment today to really pause, look closely at your own inner map, and start gently guiding your gorilla toward the life you actually want to live. Thank you so much for exploring this with me today, and I will see you next time.